Buongiorno a tutti, sono Elisabetta Barisoni, la responsabile di Ca Pesaro, Galleria Internazionale d'Arte Moderna di Venezia, che è parte della Fondazione Musei Civici della città lagunare. E oggi presentiamo una pubblicazione, il catalogo di una mostra molto importante per molti motivi, sia per il progetto che l'ha preceduta e poi per gli esiti che ha avuto. La mostra è Senza respiro, arte contemporanea a Londra, e che abbiamo inaugurato lo scorso 19 ottobre. La mostra ha vissuto una grandissima fase progettuale, fase in cui ha avuto l'elaborazione di numerosi concetti, come espresso nel saggio in catalogo di uno dei curatori insieme a me, Sir Norman Rosenthal. La mostra è partita prima di tutto dalla definizione di una nuova generazione di artisti inglesi e artisti London Art Now, questo è il titolo in inglese, artisti che lavorano, vivono e studiano o hanno studiato nella capitale inglese, a Londra. Come ricostruito appunto Rosenthal nel suo saggio, siamo forse, con i punti di domanda giustamente della critica d'arte, di fronte a una nuova generazione di giovani giovanissimi che abbiamo invitato ad esporre a Ca Pesaro 16 artisti, di cui 5 opere fatte apposta per il museo, apposta per la mostra, opere site specific. Ancora di più, quindi, è importante, con queste opere che sono state fatte per la mostra di Ca Pesaro e poi sono state restituite ai prestatori, agli artisti, quindi in qualche modo distrutte, è ancora più importante la documentazione di un catalogo che poi esprime il racconto visivo dell'allestimento. Gli artisti, i 16 autori, sono stati mescolati e allestiti cercando appunto di mostrare la nuova avanguardia inglese. Dicevo che la mostra ha avuto una lunga gestazione perché ha cambiato anche molti titoli nella nostra testa. Quando nel 2017 abbiamo iniziato a lavorarci con Rosenthal e col giovanissimo curatore Woodlock, eravamo partiti dal concetto di after sensation, dopo sensation. Sensation è la celebre mostra che nel 1997 proprio Rosenthal ha inaugurato alla Royal Academy of Arts di Londra. È una mostra importantissima per gli anni 90 perché ha presentato gli artisti della nuova avanguardia inglese, tra cui Damien Hirst, Sarah Lucas, Tracey Emin, tutta una nuova generazione. E proprio da questo punto siamo partiti per dire, punto di domanda, c'è una nuova generazione che sta crescendo e sta formando a Londra? E la nostra risposta è stata sì. Quando poi ci siamo avvicinati cercando di trovare il filo comune di questi autori, Woodlock suggeriva, come suggerisce nel suo testo in catalogo, il fatto che siano accomunati da un esaurimento vitale, esaurimento che è psicologico, dello sforzo, lo sforzo di vivere, di interpretare la vita dell'artista, che quanto mai in questi tempi materia assolutamente contemporanea, poi lo sforzo di vivere in una città tentacolare, molto cara, molto difficile, entrare nel mercato dell'arte, questo esaurimento vitale di cui parla Woodlock, che per in molti autori della mostra si ritrova. Penso per esempio alle opere di Larry Champong, che ha allestito una sala dedicata appunto a questo difficile rapporto con le sue origini, all'era post-coloniale, o alle opere site specific che abbiamo prodotto e appunto illustrato in catalogo di Ed Fornieles, di Matt Copson, e ancora la pittura di Celia Hampton o di Issy Wood, e le sculture anche provocatorie ma sempre dedicate all'autobiografia di Eddie Peake. Tutto questo gruppo di autori, tra cui appunto giovanissimi che non avevano quasi mai esposto in istituzioni museali, come Tom Hardwick Allan o il duo artistico Anna Quinlan e Rosie Hastings, che sono letteralmente arrivate direttamente in mostra per la prima volta a confronto con una generazione artistica. Ecco, tutti questi autori hanno portato alcuni suggerimenti nel rapporto con la propria biografia, nel rapporto con il mondo naturale come Alice Chenner o Nicolas Deschet, nel rapporto con la civiltà sempre più accelerata. Mi piace ricordare che l'inaugurazione della mostra il 18 ottobre sera è stata contraddistinta da una performance che abbiamo commissionato come progetto site specific all'artista Victoria Sin, che ha interpretato dalle balconate del cortile interno di Ca Pesaro lo spirito del nostro nume tutelare. Felicita Bevilacqua Lamasa, la donna che nel 1898 ha donato Ca Pesaro alla città di Venezia, destinandola agli artisti non invitati alle esposizioni ufficiali. Con la performance The Will, che vuol dire la volontà, il testamento, il senso della vita, il senso del scolorire, dello scomparire delle cose, Victoria Sin ci ha affascinati nella sera inaugurale. Sera inaugurale che ha visto la partecipazione e grande supporto non solo del Consiglio d'amministrazione, evidentemente della Fondazione Musei Civici, del direttore Gabriella Belli, ma anche molto forte del mondo inglese, il British Council, che voglio ricordare ha sostenuto il progetto e il catalogo, l'ambasciatrice inglese in Italia Jill Morris, e quando parlavo di gestazione della mostra, uno dei titoli possibili che abbiamo avuto quando poi stavamo avvicinandoci alla data di inaugurazione è stato Out. Out perché la mostra ha inaugurato coincidendo con un dato, con un momento epocale della storia europea, della storia britannica, la Brexit. Quindi quando stavamo inaugurando la Gran Bretagna si accingeva a fare un passo assolutamente sconvolgente dal punto di vista economico, politico e sociale, ma anche culturale e di interpretazione. E ancora una volta gli artisti sono il termometro, sono stati il termometro di questi cambiamenti in atto, gli artisti di Londra. La mostra è inaugurata e si è conclusa, parlavo della gestazione e voglio chiudere con l'esito. La mostra è diventata mitica in un certo qual modo e il suo catalogo ancora più importante perché il 12 novembre, come molti di voi ricordano, Venezia è stata travolta da un'acqua alta eccezionale, la più grande acqua alta dal 1966, che ha gravemente danneggiato anche il piano terra del palazzo di Ca Pesaro, dello splendido palazzo barocco di Baldassare Longhena. Abbiamo dovuto chiudere il museo, le opere non sono danneggiate perché erano ai piani superiori, ma il piano terra non era più agibile, abbiamo dovuto chiudere il museo, avevamo riniziato i lavori di ripristino, c'è stata a febbraio l'ulteriore blocco del coronavirus, ci troviamo oggi in un'emergenza che nel caso di Venezia si è sommata a un'altra emergenza, quindi la mostra è stata visitabile per 3 settimane, poco più di 3 settimane. Ringrazio ancora una volta l'editore Magonza che ha raccolto la sfida di documentare un progetto che è così importante, appunto perché intanto documenta un momento specifico dell'arte contemporanea inglese, la nascita, ci auguriamo con grande successo per gli artisti, di una nuova generazione. Documenta la volontà di Ca Pesaro di essere e di farsi ancora una volta museo del presente, museo che accoglie la contemporaneità, che accoglie gli artisti dove viene creato il contemporaneo e la nuova voce dell'arte contemporanea e in un certo qual modo testimonia anche purtroppo le vicende che hanno contraddistinto gli ultimi mesi a Venezia e poi a livello internazionale. Gli artisti, mi permetto di lasciarvi con questo pensiero, per certe cose avevano già intuito o stavano mandando dei messaggi in questo senso. Gli artisti spesso capiscono prima, capiscono più intensamente oppure intuiscono. Quindi è davvero un grande piacere avere in questo momento questo catalogo che testimonia una grande collaborazione e mi auguro appunto che porti fortuna agli autori che abbiamo invitato, alle istituzioni che ci hanno supportato e anche a Ca Pesaro. Grazie.
Breathless was an extraordinary exhibition that took place in Venice, in Ca Pesaro, last October, I think it was, quite early on in October, before the floods that struck Venice and before the coronavirus epidemic struck Italy, and particularly northern Italy, before it spread all over Europe and indeed all over the world. And Breathless somehow, looking back, seems a remarkably prescient title, because so many people are dying because one of the symptoms of the coronavirus is the lack of breath, i.e. breathlessness, even though it was originally the title of a film by Godard made in the 1960s. And the exhibition was essentially about art hailing from London at this time. And again, I think the exhibition was prescient in another way. It was because I think after the coronavirus disappears, the locus of art will become increasingly important, and indeed, in my opinion, has always been important. Where art is made, where I think there are distinctions between European art and East Asian art and American art, and within Europe itself, distinctions between art made in Great Britain, in Italy, in Germany, in Spain, in France, etc., etc. And this exhibition was about art in London, and London has been and continues to be a very, very creative city for music, for the visual arts, and for pretty well everything that is connected with the so-called, now, to use an unfortunate expression, the creative industries. And this exhibition likes to prove, or set out to prove, that there is a really exciting new generation of young British artists that have succeeded, have come, as it were, in a world which is very different to the world that gave rise to the Sensation Generation, an exhibition that I curated about 7 years after Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin, Sarah Lucas, and all their friends suddenly emerged at the very end of the 1980s, and was then that exhibition was somehow encapsulated by that exhibition Sensation. And if one goes back even further, one from, shall we say, to the 1930s, when British art began to, as it were, assert its international position with artists such as Henry Moore and Barbara Hepworth, and then later by artists such as Francis Bacon, Leon Kossoff, Frank Auerbach, who, as it were, established a very idiosyncratic art that was very different to the modernist art that was, as it were, perceived to be the norm, that was, as it were, hailing from New York, the world of Jackson Pollock, etc., etc., the world of abstract expressionism, but in the meantime has come to be seen as equally strong, as equally valid as that very different art that was being, that very different international art that was being made at the time. And then came pop art, of course, and London made a very considerable contribution to what you might call international pop art. Italy played a big part in that as well at the time, and obviously New York played a big part, but certainly artists such as David Hockney, Alan Jones, Richard Hamilton, Eduardo Paolozzi, and many others took a big part. And that was again, in its turn, succeeded by the world of conceptual art, where again Italy made a very decisive contribution, but then England made its own very decisive and individual contribution in the works of artists such as Richard Long, Gilbert and George, Anish Kapoor, Anthony Gormley, etc. And so then came the Sensation Generation, which certainly took the world by storm. And now I think there is a new generation in London, and dealing with very, very different issues that have certainly come to the fore, both internationally and locally. at the end of the first decade of the 21st century and into the second decade of the 21st century, second and third decades of the 21st century, issues such as issues of gender, issues of ethnic origin, issues around the media revolution. These have all taken on completely new dimensions, as indeed has the so-called hoped for green revolution that is supposed to come to the world. And all these issues were in one way or another reflected in this very beautiful, extraordinary exhibition, which included something like 16 artists, I think. The eyes was something of a sketch towards a new version of a new generation of British artists that were represented by artists such as Larry Achiampong, who, as it were, who is a black artist who lives in London, born in London, but is of Ghanaian origin, whose extraordinary installation of skateboards, again resembling a kind of battlefield, was extraordinarily evocative and, if you like, part of an exhibition that is also, because art comes from art, and there was an extraordinary sense of art that seems in some ways, like all good art, to find its origins in the past as well, the past being metamorphosized into a real contemporary presence. So there we have Larry's battle that was almost medieval. One can think of the Blakean world of Tom Hardwick Allen, his wonderful huge butterfly wings that reminded me certainly of the great English artist William Blake at the beginning of the 19th century. The worlds of Matt Copson, who has the world of Matt Copson and his extraordinary tunnel, his hellish tunnel that somehow again seemed to both anticipate the current situation the world is in and the tunnel out of which we hope to come, but it was a tunnel, if you like, of hell, a fiery hell which was populated and dominated by a crazy fox-like figure that seemed to be in control of the world. One can think too of the dystopian world of Ed Fornelli's, a dystopia though, which has very much to do with the media hell in which we are living at the moment from many perspectives. But at the same time, there's also a sense of contemporary painting, not being dead in any way at all. I just think of the beautiful paintings of Eddie Peake, of Celia Hempton, of Izzy Wood, which again confirms that it is possible to make painting in a way that seems both very contemporary and different, and yet is located in the past. In the case of Hannah Quinlan and Rosie Hastings, in the world, for example, of Poussin. Quite surprisingly, even though their real subject is male gay subculture. So to combine these two things, to combine, as it were, the past with the present in this way, was something that I think the exhibition brought home and manifested in a very beautiful way. I think of the back to the beautiful hanging crabs, empty crab shells of Alice Channer, which again spoke of a desiccated nature that needs to be reasserted and come to life again. Again, a very contemporary issue, an increasingly contemporary issue. I think of the sound world evoked by the work of Lydia Udramain, again an artist from North Africa, who was even in North Africa, and she was, as it were, communicating with her audience, even as the exhibition was going on, in some kind of long-distance way that was very beautiful and very evocative. So there were many Again, I think of Nicholas.The and the way his high reliefs, as it were, seem to be both Roman in one sense, and at the same time reminded one of the inside of the human body. So the body, the issue of body and of is again a major issue in contemporary art today. So I think there were many issues that were raised by this exhibition in a very beautiful, very colourful, and very strange and almost surreal way. And the way the exhibition came to an end after only 3 weeks, as a result of the tragic floods that hit Venice, and then not soon thereafter, after the floods subsided, by the coronavirus, which, as it were, emptied Venice and so many other towns of the world, so many metropolitan towns of the world became, as it were, like metaphysical townscapes of the Chirico. But hopefully will rise again into a new world in which these artists will continue. These artists and many others will continue to make work that address not so much consciously but subconsciously addresses in individual ways the issues that face the world. Okay, exhibition making is a learning process. Some of the artists I did in fact know for quite a long time before the exhibition became a reality or became a project. But others I've discovered, and that has given me huge pleasure, and I'd like to thank all the artists in the exhibition for their contributions, which were all enthusiastic and meaningful. And then, of course, I would like to thank the Ca Pesaro and the Venice museums for making the exhibition possible. I'm thinking of the director of all the museums in Venice, Gabriella Belli, and then, of course, of Elisabetta Barisoni, who is the director of the Ca Pesaro, who really was enthusiastic and knowledgeable about this exhibition from the beginning, and has written a very interesting essay for the catalogue. There's a very interesting catalogue that has indeed been produced with essays by Harry, by Elisabetta, and by myself, and that of course is a souvenir of what has become a sort of ghost exhibition. But the fact that it is a ghost exhibition is part of its beauty, and in a funny kind of way is, as it were, a metaphor for what was to come all around the world, where exhibitions are being cancelled and things are changing. The art world, the world of art, is a changing world now, and I think our exhibition was in many respects in the vanguard. And then of course I want to thank Harry Woodlock himself for initiating this exhibition, and it was a lot of fun, as it were, exploring from my position as an older person and from his position as a younger person, making this exhibition together. We had a lot of fun, and I like to think the exhibition was a more than worthwhile project. A couple of other things I would like to say concerning the origin of the exhibition. The origin of the exhibition came about as a result of an initiative by a young London curator who approached the Ca Pesaro, and wonderfully this was a young person called Harry Woodlock, who also had come to me and said, would I, as it were, support this initiative. And as somebody who has done many exhibitions over many years, I was very happy to, if you like, mentor Harry, and in the end we became, as it were, partners in what turned out to be a beautiful enterprise with the Ca Pesaro, who had accepted this extraordinary initiative to, for the very first time, bring together a picture of London in what he called a city of vital exhaustion, and which I called the city that was very much connected with the word out. Out being, of course, in a negative sense, related to the way that British politics has chosen to turn its back, in a certain sense, on Europe, though culturally it will never do that. But also in using the word in the sense that all the artists represent a new kind of self-honesty to do with the word out. They out themselves. They want to tell the world through their art exactly who they are. And this is certainly something that was very clear in the exhibition. I should also speak of other artists such as Alvaro Barrington, who is a painter who originally comes from Brooklyn, or actually comes from the West Indies via Brooklyn, but has chosen to settle in London and is an extraordinarily talented painter as well, very much in the American tradition, which has always played a big part in London art. So that kind of abstraction, this new kind of abstraction, but it was an abstraction that is very much related to his own self-identity, his own very conscious self-identity as a black man, just as the bomber jackets of Prem Sahib beautifully kind of encapsulated in perspex, if you like, speak of a fashion world that is very much connected to gay subcultures in London, which again are very much out. Out is the big thing now. People are out, but at the same time vitally exhausted. But then we settled rather surreptitiously on this title, Breathless, which speaks, I think, of our time.
The idea for this exhibition originated back in 2015. Norman and I were both interested in the state of contemporary visual culture in London in the wake of the YBA generation and the exhibition Sensation, Young British Artists from the Saatchi collection, which took place at the Royal Academy of Arts in London in 1997. We wanted to present a group of young and emerging artists from different disciplines, backgrounds, and points of view, who we felt responded to the concerns of a generation living and working in the city today. London is an extraordinary city for all sorts of different reasons. Its history, multiculturalism, and the sense of freedom experienced by all those who come here. But it has also become a place of tremendous division, inequality, and loneliness. I wanted to use the catalogue essay to consider this reality within a social, economic, and political framework. A key interest for me is the way capitalism has been regulated by governments in Britain over the last 40 years, and the stress this has placed on society and in social life. I wanted specifically to consider the integration of the free market in now near every aspect of our lives, and the way that this has manufactured stress, alienation, and a sense of loss for so many of us who live here. Consider this reality in relation to some of the artworks in the exhibition itself. I was struck by the sense of anxiety in the work of Alice Channa, for example. Channa's crustacean satellites, which she realised in 2018, are a series of metallicized crab shells which she's hung systematically on these circular stainless steel jigs. These works are both spontaneous and rational at the same time and bring into focus this tension that so often exists in the relationship between industry and nature. I was drawn then to the sense of inhibition in the work of Prem Sahib. Sahib's Taken by Your Equivocal Stance 3, which he realised in 2015, uses these sports hoodies to invoke the tactility and togetherness of male bodies, whilst suspending them in glass-panelled structures as if to inhibit touch and the senses. The close physical proximity described in these works only goes to enhance the loss of something far less tangible, this kind of suffocated expression of a certain kind of desire. Desire and loss are also themes in the work of Izzy Wood. Easter Security, which she painted in 2019, is a tantalising depiction of a chocolate Easter bunny. For me, this work symbolised a kind of compulsive pursuit, a sense of pleasure or sensation which exists permanently outside of one's own self, and yet, despite the inevitable dissatisfaction that comes at the point of consumption, somehow continues to energise this drive that moves us forward so relentlessly. We were keen to find a title that would mean something to both English and Italian audiences, and capture the affliction of late capitalism on the body itself. Senza respiro quite literally translates to without breath or breathless. And what is so interesting, perhaps even prophetic, is the way this title would come to mean in the weeks and months directly following the opening of the exhibition itself. In November, Venice experienced its worst flooding for 50 years, a deluge or drowning considered by many the direct result of climate change. Then, of course, the extraordinary scenes of the city, indeed the world, in lockdown as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, a disease of the lungs, of breath and of breathing. In this sense, then, the exhibition might be said to sketch out the contours of a kind of generational grief. What is so interesting about art is the way it gives visibility to ideas and experiences which are often so hard to capture in verbal language itself. I am interested then in a visual culture that helps us to refurbish a critique of capitalism so that we may shape an iteration of it that works in our own time.